Alex, can you come get me? Emily Carter barely recognized her own voice as the words escaped her lips. Outside the cramped storage room, crystal glasses chimed beneath glittering chandeliers while a string quartet drifted through the ballroom, celebrating the happiest day of her younger sister's life. Inside, all Emily could hear was the uneven rhythm of her 6-year-old son's breathing as Noah struggled to hold back tears he was far too young to understand. One of his tiny dress shoes rested on the floor beside him, its lace untied after he had tripped while trying to keep up with adults who never once slowed down for him. Emily leaned against a shelf stacked with folded tablecloths, pressing her free hand against the wall to steady herself. The elegant navy dress she had carefully repaired the night before now carried a faint stain from a splash of red wine she hadn't even noticed until someone politely pointed it out with an apologetic smile that somehow hurt more than open cruelty. On the other end of the phone, silence lingered for only a heartbeat. "Emily?" Alexander Hayes said quietly. His voice was calm, familiar, and completely free of judgment. She closed her eyes. She had promised herself she would never make this call. Not after everything he had already done for her months earlier. Not after insisting she could solve her own problems. But tonight felt different. Tonight wasn't about unpaid bills or a broken-down car. Tonight was about Noah asking why they weren't allowed to stand in the family picture. It was about watching her little boy hide the handmade wedding card he had colored all week because someone had suggested it didn't quite match the expensive gifts on the display table. Most of all, it was about realizing that no matter how hard she smiled, she could no longer convince her son that everything was okay. "Can you come get me?" she whispered again, almost embarrassed by how small she sounded. There was no long explanation. No dramatic speech. She didn't tell him about the whispers that followed her through the ballroom or the table tucked beside the service doors where she and Noah had quietly taken their seats. She didn't mention that her sister had looked at her with apologetic eyes before turning back toward the photographer because hundreds of guests were waiting. She simply listened. Somewhere hundreds of miles away in downtown Manhattan, Alexander slowly closed the leather folder lying open in front of him. Around a polished conference table, executives paused in the middle of discussing a billion-dollar acquisition. Someone was explaining projected earnings. Another was waiting for his signature. None of them mattered anymore. "Where are you?" he asked. Emily swallowed. "The Grand Windsor Hotel, but forget I called. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have bothered you." She heard a chair slide across hardwood flooring. Then footsteps. Then a door opening. "Stay where you are," Alexander replied with the same steady voice that had once convinced a frightened elderly woman she would be okay in an emergency room months before Emily ever learned who he really was. "I'm coming." Emily lowered the phone slowly as Noah looked up at her with watery blue eyes. "Is someone coming for us, Mom?" he asked. She forced the smallest smile she could manage and brushed a loose strand of blonde hair away from his forehead. Before she could answer, the applause outside erupted louder than ever as the bride and groom entered the ballroom together, while in another city, Alexander Hayes walked away from the biggest meeting of the year without looking back. Emily slipped her phone into her purse before Noah could notice that her hands were still trembling. She wrapped her fingers around his smaller hand and gently tied the loose shoelace that had come undone only minutes earlier. "Are we leaving?" he asked in a quiet voice. She looked toward the ballroom doors where laughter spilled into the hallway like warm light, then back at her son. "Soon," she answered softly. "We just have to get our coats." Noah nodded without another question. He had learned far too early that sometimes adults smiled because they did not know what else to do. They stepped back into the hallway together. Waiters carrying silver trays hurried past them while guests gathered near the ballroom entrance, excitedly talking about the first dance. Emily kept her eyes lowered, hoping to disappear into the crowd long enough to reach the coat room. Instead, she heard someone call her name. "Emily." She stopped. Margaret Caldwell approached with perfect posture, wearing the effortless confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime believing every room belonged to her. Her smile looked pleasant enough for anyone watching from a distance, but her eyes carried a different message. "There you are," she said. Several guests mentioned that your little boy seemed upset. Weddings can be overwhelming for children. Emily forced a polite smile. He is just tired. We are heading home. Margaret glanced at Noah before returning her attention to Emily. That is probably for the best. Richard's business partners have flown in from all over the country. Tonight is very important for both families. We would all appreciate a peaceful evening. Emily understood every word that remained unspoken. Noah squeezed her hand a little tighter. Before she could respond, another familiar voice interrupted. Emily, I did not expect to see you here. Her heart sank. Jason Miller walked toward them wearing an expensive charcoal suit that Emily knew he could never have afforded a year ago. Beside him stood an elegant woman with a diamond bracelet that caught the ballroom lights every time she moved. Jason smiled as though they had remained close friends instead of becoming strangers connected only by a child. He bent slightly toward Noah. Hey, buddy. You are getting tall. Noah offered a small smile but stayed close to his mother. Jason straightened again. I have been meaning to call you, he said casually. We should probably talk about Noah's future. Emily felt the muscles in her show. The sedan came to a smooth stop beneath the hotel entrance without drawing attention to itself. It was not the longest car in the driveway, nor the most expensive-looking one among the luxury vehicles lined outside. Nothing about it announced power. Yet something inside Emily settled the moment she saw it. She did not know why. Perhaps because for the first time that evening, someone had come because she mattered instead of because appearances did. Jason followed her gaze toward the entrance and let out a quiet laugh. Looks like another guest arrived. You should not keep pretending someone is coming to rescue you. Emily did not answer. She simply rested one hand on Noah's shoulder. Across the lobby, the revolving door turned slowly as a tall man stepped inside wearing a dark overcoat over a charcoal suit. There was no dramatic entrance, no group of assistants surrounding him, no photographers waiting. He paused only long enough to thank the valet who held the door before continuing toward the hallway with calm, measured steps. Several hotel employees immediately straightened their posture as they recognized him. The general manager appeared almost instantly, greeting him with quiet respect instead of loud enthusiasm. Alexander Hayes nodded politely but did not stop walking. His eyes searched the corridor until they found Emily standing beside Noah. The distance between them was still nearly 50 feet, yet Emily somehow knew he had seen the exhaustion she had tried to hide all evening. Jason noticed the sudden change in the staff around him and frowned. Who is that? He asked no one in particular. Margaret turned toward the lobby, and the color slowly faded from her face. Richard Caldwell, who had just left the ballroom after greeting another group of guests, froze the instant he recognized Alexander. Richard hurried toward his future mother-in-law. Why is he here? He whispered. Margaret did not answer because she did not have one. Emily watched Alexander continue forward with the same steady pace, never rushing, never hesitating. Noah looked up curiously. Mom, he whispered. Is that Mr. Alex? Emily nodded once. Yes. Noah's expression softened with immediate relief, the kind that only children could show without questioning whether it was appropriate. I knew he would come, he said. Those simple words carried farther than Emily expected. Jason stared at her in disbelief. Richard's attention shifted rapidly from Emily to Alexander and back again as though trying to solve a puzzle that suddenly threatened everything he thought he understood. Alexander finally reached them. He did not look at Jason. He did not acknowledge Margaret or Richard. His full attention remained on Emily and Noah. He crouched until he was at Noah's eye level and offered him a warm smile. Hello, Noah. I heard you had a difficult night. Noah nodded honestly. I tried to be brave. Alexander smiled a little wider. I believe you were. Then he stood and turned toward Emily. For a brief moment neither of them spoke. They simply looked at one another, and somehow the silence felt kinder than anything anyone else had said all evening. Alexander gently removed his overcoat and placed it across Emily's shoulders without asking for an explanation or demanding one in return. His voice remained low enough that only those standing nearby could hear him. Are you ready to go home? Emily felt tears threaten again, but this time they came from relief instead of humiliation. Before she could answer, Richard stepped forward with an uneasy smile and extended his hand. Mr. Hayes, I am Richard Caldwell. This is actually my wedding reception. We were not expecting. Alexander finally looked away from Emily. His expression stayed calm, respectful, and impossible to read. I was not invited, he said quietly. I came because someone asked for help. Richard slowly lowered his outstretched hand, forcing a polite smile that no longer reached his eyes. Around them, conversations faded into cautious whispers as more guests recognized the name Alexander Hayes. Emily could almost feel the atmosphere changing without understanding exactly why. A few moments earlier she had been nothing more than the divorced older sister standing near the service hallway. Now every curious glance seemed to bounce between her and the man who had crossed the city just because she had asked for help. Margaret recovered first. Years of attending charity galas and corporate dinners had taught her how to hide surprise beneath flawless manners. Mr. Hayes, she said warmly, what an unexpected honor. Please join us for the reception. Richard has admired your company for years. Alexander acknowledged her with a courteous nod. Thank you, but I am only here for Emily and Noah. The simple answer landed heavier than anyone expected. It was not rude. It was not dramatic. It simply left no room for misunderstanding. Jason folded his arms. You came all this way because she called you? He asked with a skeptical smile. Alexander looked at him calmly. Yes. That seems unusual. Not to me. Jason let out a quiet laugh. You barely know her. Emily lowered her eyes, suddenly wishing the conversation would end before it became another public spectacle. Alexander noticed the discomfort on her face before answering. Sometimes you learn more about a person's character in one afternoon than you do about someone else in 10 years. Jason's smile faded. Noah reached for Alexander's hand without hesitation. Mr. Alex? He asked softly. Are we really going home? Alexander looked down at the little boy. If that is what you and your mother want, then yes. Noah smiled for the first time that evening. Emily felt a painful knot loosen inside her chest. She had spent the entire night trying to protect her son from disappointment, yet one calm sentence had accomplished what she no longer could. Just then the ballroom doors opened again as Lauren hurried into the hallway, still wearing her white wedding gown. She looked from Emily to Alexander, then toward the growing crowd that had quietly gathered nearby. Emily, she said breathlessly, I have been looking everywhere for you. Her voice carried genuine concern, but it arrived far too late to erase the silence that had come before. Emily managed a tired smile. Congratulations. You look beautiful. Lauren's eyes filled with regret as she noticed Alexander's coat resting over her sister's shoulders. I did not know. She began before stopping herself. She clearly did not know what to say. Margaret stepped closer to her daughter. Lauren, your guests are waiting. Lauren hesitated. For a brief second Emily saw the frightened younger sister she had raised after their mother's passing instead of the elegant bride standing beneath sparkling chandeliers. Richard gently touched Lauren's arm. Everyone is expecting us. Lauren looked back at Emily once more, silently asking for understanding she had not yet earned. Emily simply nodded, refusing to make her choose in front of everyone. Alexander watched the exchange without interrupting. He understood that some wounds belonged to family, and could not be solved by influence or money. He turned toward Emily. Your coat is in the check room? She nodded. And Noah's too. Then let us get them. He spoke as though leaving were the most natural decision in the world. No speeches. No accusations. Just one quiet step toward the exit. As they started walking together, the hotel manager hurried across the marble floor and respectfully addressed Alexander. Sir, there is something you should know before you leave. The chairman of Caldwell Development has been trying to reach you all evening regarding tomorrow morning's signing meeting. Richard's face lost every trace of confidence as he realized that the future of his family's biggest business deal now stood only a few feet away from the woman everyone had spent the evening treating as though she did not belong. The manager's words settled over the hallway like a sudden change in the weather. Richard forced a nervous laugh and adjusted the cuff of his tuxedo as though the conversation meant nothing. "Tomorrow is just another meeting," he said, glancing toward Alexander. "Business can always wait until after family celebrations." Alexander thanked the manager with a quiet nod before answering. "Family should always come first." His reply sounded simple, but Richard understood the weight behind it. Emily did not. She only wanted to leave before Noah grew any more tired. She gently squeezed her son's hand and looked toward the coat check across the lobby. "We should go," she said softly. Alexander turned to walk beside her, but Jason stepped into their path with an expression that looked almost friendly to anyone watching from a distance. "Before you leave," he said, "there is something Alexander deserves to know." Emily closed her eyes for a brief moment. "Jason, please." He ignored her. "You should understand that Emily has a habit of making people feel responsible for rescuing her. She has always depended on someone else when life became difficult." Noah looked up at his father with confusion. "My mom works all the time," he said quietly. "She does not ask people for things." Jason hesitated, clearly surprised that his own son had answered him. Alexander remained calm. He looked at Noah first instead of Jason. "Your mother has never asked me to solve her life," he said. "She asked me for a ride home. There is a difference." The little boy nodded as if that explanation made perfect sense. Emily felt tears gathering again, but she blinked them away before anyone noticed. She had spent years defending herself. Somehow Alexander had defended her without taking away her dignity. Margaret folded her hands together. "Perhaps everyone is simply emotional tonight," she suggested. "There is no reason to let a misunderstanding become larger than it already is." Emily looked at her politely. "I agree. That is why Noah and I are leaving." Lauren took one uncertain step toward her sister. "Emily, please stay for one more dance. I never wanted you to feel unwelcome." Emily studied her sister's face. She could see the sincerity, but she could also see the fear of disappointing everyone else. "I know you did not want this," Emily answered gently. "But wanting something and protecting it are not always the same." Lauren lowered her eyes. She knew exactly what her sister meant. For a long moment nobody spoke. The music from the ballroom drifted into the lobby as another slow song began. Couples laughed together beneath the crystal lights while Emily stood only a few yards away feeling as though she belonged to another world entirely. Alexander broke the silence with the same steady kindness that had carried him through the evening. "Would you like me to get your coats?" he asked. Emily shook her head. "We can get them together." He smiled faintly. "Then let us do that." They walked side by side toward the coat check, with Noah happily holding both of their hands. Behind them, Richard watched in growing silence. His phone vibrated inside his jacket pocket. The message came from his father. It contained only one sentence. "Do not let Alexander Hayes leave before I speak with him." Richard slowly looked up again, but Alexander never once turned toward him. His attention remained exactly where Emily had needed it from the moment she made that call, and for the first time all evening, she no longer felt invisible. Emily accepted her coat from the attendant with a quiet thank you and helped Noah slip his small arms into his navy jacket. He looked up at her with the innocent confidence only a child could carry. "Can Mr. Alex ride with us?" he asked. Emily smiled for the first time that evening without forcing it. "If he wants to." Alexander buttoned his overcoat and answered before she could say anything else. "I would like that very much." Noah beamed as though the entire night had suddenly become an adventure instead of a disappointment. They had almost reached the revolving doors when hurried footsteps echoed across the marble floor. "Mr. Hayes, please wait." Richard caught up with them, breathing a little harder than before. Behind him, Margaret and Lauren followed more slowly. Several curious guests drifted into the lobby, pretending to leave while clearly hoping to witness whatever happened next. Richard offered an uneasy smile. I know tonight has been complicated. I hope nothing that happened here affects tomorrow's meeting. Alexander looked at him with the same composed expression he had worn since arriving. What happened here belongs to your family. Tomorrow's meeting belongs to our companies. I do not confuse the two. Richard released a quiet breath of relief, but Alexander continued before he could respond. However, the way people treat those who cannot offer them anything often reveals more than a financial statement ever could. The words were spoken gently, without accusation, yet they settled over the lobby with unmistakable weight. Margaret lowered her eyes for the first time all evening. Emily shifted uncomfortably. She did not want this night to become a lesson delivered because of her. She touched Alexander's sleeve lightly. It is all right, she said. I just want to go home. He nodded immediately. Then that is exactly what we will do. Lauren stepped closer until she stood only a few feet from her sister. The excitement that had filled her face earlier had disappeared beneath quiet regret. Emily, she whispered, I should have walked over to you when they moved your seat. I saw it happen. I told myself I would fix it later, but later never came. Emily looked at the woman she had once helped with homework, driven to college interviews, and comforted after every disappointment. You were busy becoming a bride, she answered softly. I understand that. Lauren slowly shook her head. No. You are trying to make this easier for me again. Tears gathered in her eyes. You have been doing that since we were kids. Emily reached forward and gently squeezed her sister's hand. Tonight is still your wedding day. Do not spend it apologizing in a hotel lobby. Before Lauren could answer, Noah reached into his jacket pocket and carefully pulled out the handmade wedding card he had hidden earlier. The edges were slightly bent, but the bright crayon still showed two smiling stick figures standing beneath a rainbow beside the words, Congratulations, and Lauren. Noah held it out with both hands. I still want you to have it, he said shyly. Lauren accepted the card as though it were the most valuable gift she had received all day. A single tear rolled down her cheek. Thank you, she whispered. I am going to keep this forever. Alexander quietly watched the exchange without interrupting. He understood that forgiveness could never be demanded, only offered when the time felt right. As the revolving doors slowly turned, a black sport utility vehicle entered the hotel driveway behind Alexander's sedan. Thomas Reed stepped out from the driver's seat carrying a leather portfolio. He approached Alexander with calm urgency, and spoke just loudly enough to be heard. Sir, your office has received new information about Caldwell Development. You should probably see this before tomorrow morning. Richard's expression changed instantly as he realized the evening was no longer ending with unanswered questions. It was only beginning. Alexander accepted the leather portfolio from Thomas Reed but did not open it immediately. Instead, he glanced toward Emily, who was helping Noah zip his jacket against the cool evening air drifting through the revolving doors. Can it wait until morning? Alexander asked quietly. Thomas hesitated for only a second. Normally I would say yes, sir. But this report came from the compliance team less than 20 minutes ago. Richard instinctively took one step forward before stopping himself. Every muscle in his face tightened as if he already knew the documents could not contain good news. Emily noticed the sudden tension but had no interest in becoming part of another uncomfortable conversation. Alexander, she said gently, you really do not have to stay because of us. You have already done more than enough. He looked at her with the same calm expression that had greeted her the moment he arrived. Emily, I am not staying because of business. He paused before adding, I am making sure you and Noah get home safely. The simple sentence carried no hint of obligation. It sounded like a promise made without expecting gratitude in return. Noah reached for Alexander's hand again. Mom says promises matter. Alexander smiled. Your mother is right. Thomas quietly handed over the portfolio, then stepped back without another word. Alexander finally opened it. He scanned only the first page before closing the folder again. His expression barely changed, yet Thomas immediately understood that his employer had seen something important. Richard swallowed nervously. "Mr. Hayes," he began, "if this concerns tomorrow's agreement, I would appreciate the opportunity to explain anything that may seem unusual." Alexander met his eyes without hostility. "If there is an explanation, I am sure the appropriate people will hear it." "You are not canceling the meeting?" Richard asked hopefully. "I have not made any decisions." Alexander's voice remained even. "I do not make decisions based on assumptions, and I do not punish people without facts." Emily quietly admired the answer. It sounded exactly like the man she had met months earlier, the man who had thanked a grocery store cashier by name and carried an elderly woman's shopping bags without caring whether anyone noticed. Wealth had never been the first thing she associated with Alexander. Character had. Margaret slowly approached Emily while the others remained focused on the business discussion. Her voice had lost the polished confidence it carried earlier. "Emily, I owe you an apology." Emily looked at her with gentle surprise. Margaret continued, "I spent too much time worrying about how this evening looked to everyone else and not enough time thinking about how it felt for you and Noah." Emily considered the words carefully. "Thank you for saying that." Margaret lowered her eyes. "I hope one day you will forgive me." Emily offered a small, sincere smile. "Forgiveness takes time. But honesty is a good place to begin." A few feet away, Lauren quietly held Noah's handmade card against her wedding bouquet. She looked at the colorful drawing again before wiping another tear from her cheek. It was the smallest gift she had received all day, yet somehow it had become the one she treasured most. Alexander slipped the portfolio back into Thomas's hands. "Please have legal and compliance review every document independently before sunrise," he instructed. "No shortcuts. No exceptions." Thomas nodded. "Yes, sir." Alexander then turned away from the business matter as naturally as if it had never interrupted the evening. He opened the passenger door of the sedan for Emily before kneeling beside Noah. "Young man," he asked with a warm smile, "would you like to help me choose the music for the drive home?" Noah's face brightened instantly. As the little boy climbed into the back seat, Richard remained standing beneath the hotel lights, watching the car that was slowly carrying away the one person everyone had underestimated until someone powerful chose to stand quietly beside her. The city lights stretched across the windshield in quiet ribbons of gold as the sedan pulled away from the hotel. For several minutes, no one felt the need to fill the silence. It was the kind of silence that no longer felt lonely. Soft piano music drifted through the speakers while Noah sat in the back seat, watching buildings pass one after another until the excitement of the evening slowly gave way to exhaustion. He leaned his head against the window before speaking in a sleepy voice. "Mr. Alex?" Alexander glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "Yes? Thank you for coming." Alexander smiled gently. "I am glad you called me." Noah shook his head. "I did not call you." He looked toward his mother. "She did." Emily lowered her eyes with a shy smile. "He likes correcting people." "That is because details matter," Noah replied with complete seriousness. Alexander chuckled quietly. "Your mother taught you well." A few minutes later, Noah closed his eyes and drifted to sleep, still holding the small toy car he had carried in his jacket pocket all evening. Emily carefully reached back to cover him with the blanket she always kept in the car for colder nights. She remained turned toward her son for a moment before finally facing forward again. "I am sorry," she said softly. "I interrupted your meeting. I know how important your work is." Alexander kept his eyes on the road. "The meeting can be rescheduled." "Not a meeting like that." "No." He smiled faintly. "Not a meeting like that." Emily looked out the passenger window. "You should not have left because of me." "I did not leave because of you." She turned toward him with quiet confusion. Alexander continued driving before finishing the thought. "I left because someone I care about asked for help." Emily felt her heartbeat slow. It had been months since they first met, yet he had never spoken those words so plainly. She looked down at her hands, remembering the afternoon that had changed everything. It had started in a neighborhood grocery store during a heavy spring rain. An elderly woman had collapsed near the checkout lanes while shoppers froze in uncertainty. Emily had stayed with her, called an ambulance, ridden to the hospital, and quietly paid for the taxi after learning the woman had forgotten her purse at home. She had never asked for a name. She had simply stayed until the woman's family arrived. 2 days later, there had been a knock on Emily's apartment door. Alexander had been standing there holding the exact amount she had spent on the taxi along with a handwritten thank you note from his mother, Eleanor Hayes. Emily had accepted the letter but returned the money. She had told him that kindness stopped being kindness the moment it became a transaction. Alexander had never forgotten those words. "My mother still talks about you," he said quietly. "She says you treated her like a neighbor instead of a stranger." Emily smiled softly. "She reminded me of my own mother." Alexander nodded. "She knows that now." The traffic light ahead turned red, and the car rolled to a gentle stop. Emily looked through the windshield at the quiet intersection glowing beneath the streetlights. "I almost deleted your number tonight," she admitted. "I kept thinking I had no right to ask you for anything." Alexander turned toward her for the first time since leaving the hotel. His voice remained calm, but every word carried unmistakable sincerity. "Emily, if you ever feel like you have to earn the right to ask for help, then the people around you have already failed you." She could not answer. She simply looked at him as the light changed to green and the car moved forward once again, carrying them toward a future neither of them realized had quietly begun the moment she decided not to face the hardest night of her life alone. The sedan slowed as it entered Emily's quiet neighborhood, a place far removed from the bright lights and polished marble floors of the hotel. The familiar streets looked different tonight. Not because anything had changed outside, but because something inside Emily finally felt lighter. For years, she had walked these sidewalks carrying every responsibility alone. Tonight, for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to simply sit and breathe. Alexander parked near the small apartment building where Emily and Noah lived. He did not immediately turn off the engine. Instead, he looked toward the building entrance and waited. Emily noticed. "You do not have to make sure we get inside," she said softly. Alexander looked at her. "I know." His answer surprised her. "Then why are you still here?" He smiled slightly. "Because sometimes people say they are fine when they are actually exhausted." Emily looked away, because he was right. She had spent years making those exact words sound believable. She opened the door, then paused. "Thank you, Alexander." He nodded. "You are welcome." Emily. Noah stirred in the back seat before they could say anything else. "Are we home?" he asked sleepily. Emily turned around with a warm smile. "Yes, sweetheart." Noah looked toward Alexander. "Will you come inside?" The question caught both adults off guard. Emily gently touched her son's shoulder. "Noah, Mr. Alex probably has work." Alexander glanced at the little boy, then at Emily. "Only if your mother says it is okay." Noah immediately looked at his mother with hopeful eyes. Emily hesitated. The old version of herself would have refused. She would have worried about owing someone something. She would have convinced herself that accepting kindness was dangerous because eventually kindness always came with expectations. But Alexander had spent the entire evening proving the opposite. "For a few minutes," she said. "A few minutes is fine." The apartment was small, warm, and filled with signs of a life built carefully around love instead of luxury. A stack of library books sat beside the couch. Noah's drawings covered one section of the refrigerator. A small plant rested near the window, slightly uneven but clearly cared for. Alexander looked around quietly, not with pity, but with appreciation. "This feels like a home," he said. Emily smiled. "It is not much. I did not say it was large." His eyes moved toward the photographs on the wall. One showed Emily and Noah laughing at a local park. Another showed a younger Emily standing beside her mother and teenage Lauren. Alexander studied the picture for a moment before noticing the expression on Emily's face. "You miss her?" Emily nodded. Every day. She sat on the edge of the couch while Noah searched through his toy box for something important enough to show their guest. My mother taught me that people remember how you make them feel more than anything else, Emily said. She did not have much money, but everyone in our neighborhood knew they could knock on our door. Alexander looked toward the family photograph again. That sounds familiar. Emily raised an eyebrow. Your mother? He nodded. She was the same way. A quiet understanding passed between them. Different lives. Different worlds. Similar lessons. Noah returned holding his favorite toy car. Mr. Alex, this is my fastest one. Alexander accepted it seriously, as if Noah had handed him something priceless. I think we need to test it. Noah smiled proudly and placed the car on the coffee table. For a few minutes, there was no billionaire CEO, no family conflict, and no painful memories from the wedding. There was only a little boy showing someone new his favorite toy and a woman watching someone treat her child with genuine kindness. Later, as Alexander prepared to leave, Emily walked him to the door. You really did not have to come tonight, she said again. Alexander looked at her quietly. Maybe not. He paused. But I wanted to. After he left, Emily stood by the door longer than she expected. Outside, the city continued moving as it always did. But inside that small apartment, something had changed. Not because someone powerful had entered her life. Because someone powerful had finally seen her without asking what she could offer in return. The morning after the wedding arrived quietly, but the peace Emily had found the night before did not last long. Sunlight slipped through the curtains of her small apartment, as Noah sat at the kitchen table drawing another picture with his favorite blue crayon. For a few minutes, everything felt normal. Emily poured coffee into an old ceramic mug and watched her son smile at his artwork. Then her phone vibrated on the counter. The message was from Lauren. Emily hesitated before opening it. She already knew something had changed. I am sorry, Lauren had written. Mom is telling everyone you caused a scene last night. Richard is saying the entire reception became uncomfortable because of what happened. Emily slowly placed the phone down. She was not surprised. Somehow, she had expected the story to change before the morning arrived. People rarely remembered the person who was hurt. They remembered the moment that made them uncomfortable. Noah looked up from his drawing. Is Aunt Lauren okay? Emily forced a small smile. She is figuring things out. Her son nodded and returned to his picture, trusting his mother completely. That trust was exactly why. Emily refused to let bitterness take over. Across the city, Alexander Hayes stood inside his office overlooking Manhattan. The same office where hundreds of decisions had been made over the years. Deals had been negotiated there. Companies had changed direction there. But that morning, Alexander was not looking at financial reports. He was looking at the documents Thomas Reed had delivered the night before. The Caldwell Development Review was clear. Several concerns had been discovered during the compliance investigation. Irregular payments. Missing records. Decisions made without proper approval. None of it was connected to Emily. That was the first thing Alexander confirmed. He had no intention of using his position because someone had embarrassed a woman he cared about. Power used emotionally was not justice. It was simply another form of unfairness. Schedule the independent review, Alexander told Thomas. I want everything verified by outside auditors. Thomas nodded. Even with the partnership deadline tomorrow? Especially because of the deadline. Alexander closed the folder. A company worth protecting should survive the truth. Later that afternoon, Emily received another call. This time it was Lauren. Her voice sounded different. Smaller. Emily, I need to tell you something. Emily sat down at the kitchen table. Okay. Lauren took a deep breath. Jason was not there by accident. Emily felt a familiar heaviness return. What do you mean? Lauren explained that after the reception, she had overheard a conversation between Jason and Richard. They had been discussing Emily's financial situation and how difficult it would be for her to challenge anything they planned. Jason had been using the wedding as an opportunity to make himself look responsible in front of important people. Emily closed her eyes. She had spent so long believing Jason only wanted distance that she never considered he might want control over the story everyone believed. "Why are you telling me this now?" Emily asked. There was a long pause. "Because I watched you leave last night," Lauren whispered. "And I realized you were the only person in that room who was not trying to impress anyone." Emily looked toward Noah, who was carefully coloring inside the lines of his drawing. "Lauren, I do not need you to fix everything." Her voice was gentle but firm. "I needed you to see me." On the other end of the call, Lauren became quiet. Sometimes the hardest truth was not admitting someone had hurt you. It was admitting you had watched it happen and stayed silent. Meanwhile, Alexander received a new update from the compliance team. The review had uncovered a connection between Jason and several questionable decisions inside Caldwell Development. He read the report once, then set it down. The next step would not be revenge. It would be the truth finally reaching the places where it had been avoided for too long. The conference room on the 42nd floor was silent when Alexander Hayes entered. Not because anyone had been told to stop speaking, but because everyone in the room understood that something important was about to happen. The executives from Caldwell Development sat around the polished table with carefully prepared documents in front of them, expecting another routine business discussion. They did not expect an independent compliance report that could change everything. Alexander placed the folder on the table and looked around the room. His expression remained calm. "Before we begin," he said, "I want everyone to understand one thing. This review was ordered because accuracy matters. Not because of personal disagreements. Not because of emotions." Richard Caldwell sat straighter in his chair. "Of course, Mr. Hayes. We completely understand." But his voice carried uncertainty. Thomas Reed connected the report to the large screen. Pages of financial information appeared one by one. The findings were clear. Several decisions inside Caldwell Development had not followed proper procedures. Certain payments required additional review. Some approvals had been handled without enough documentation. None of the information was presented dramatically. There was no anger. No accusations. Only facts. Alexander watched quietly as the room changed. The confidence that had filled the executives earlier slowly disappeared. Richard looked through the documents with growing concern. "There must be an explanation," he said. "We have always operated with integrity." Alexander nodded. "Then the review will confirm that. If mistakes were made, they can be corrected. If someone avoided responsibility, that will also become clear." His answer surprised everyone. They expected a powerful man to use power as a weapon. Instead, he used it as a responsibility. Later that afternoon, Emily sat at a small cafe near Noah's school, waiting for him to finish his art class. She held a cup of coffee between both hands while watching families walk by outside. Her phone rang. It was Lauren. "I heard what happened," Lauren said softly. Emily looked out the window. "What happened?" "About Jason. About Richard. About everything." Emily stayed quiet. Lauren continued. "I should have trusted you before anyone else. You were my sister before you were anyone's guest at that wedding." The words were simple, but they carried years of things left unsaid. Emily felt the familiar ache of remembering how many times she had protected Lauren when they were younger. She had never expected perfection from her sister. She had only wanted her to notice when she was hurting. "I do not need you to fight every battle for me," Emily said. "I just needed to know you would stand beside me when it mattered." Lauren took a deep breath. "I understand now." After the call ended, Emily looked at the small drawing Noah had left on the table. It showed 3 people holding hands beneath a bright blue sky. She smiled because children often saw what adults forgot. Connection was not about having a perfect life. It was about choosing the people who stayed when things became difficult. That evening, Alexander returned home later than usual. He stood near his apartment window overlooking the city, thinking about the woman who had once refused money from him because she believed kindness should never create a debt. His phone received a message from Emily. "Thank you for helping without making me feel helpless." Alexander read the words twice. Then he smiled. Because after everything he had achieved, after every company he had built, those few words meant more than any award he had ever received. The days after the wedding moved differently for Emily Carter. Not because life suddenly became easy, but because she no longer felt like she had to carry every difficult moment alone. She still woke before sunrise to prepare Noah's breakfast. She still checked every bill carefully before paying it. She still packed lunches and balanced her schedule between work, school pickups, and the endless responsibilities of being a mother. But something inside her had changed. She had finally allowed herself to believe that strength did not mean standing alone forever. One afternoon, Emily sat across from Lauren at a small coffee shop near the park where they used to play as children. The familiar place felt almost strange after so many years of distance. Lauren wrapped both hands around her coffee cup, searching for the right words. "I have been thinking about what you said," she began. Emily looked at her quietly. "Which part?" Lauren looked down. "That you did not need me to fix everything. You needed me to see you." The honesty in her voice made Emily pause. For years, Lauren had been the little sister Emily protected. She remembered helping her with school projects, driving her to appointments, and staying awake during difficult nights when their family was falling apart. But somewhere along the way, protecting Lauren had become easier than admitting she also needed protection sometimes. "I was so focused on having the perfect wedding," Lauren whispered, "that I forgot the person who helped me get there was standing right in front of me feeling invisible." Emily reached across the table and gently touched her sister's hand. "I was hurt." Lauren nodded. "I know. But I also know you are not a bad person because you made one painful choice." A small tear appeared in Lauren's eyes. "How can you still be kind to me?" Emily smiled sadly. "Because someone being wrong does not mean they stop being family." The conversation did not erase everything overnight. There were no perfect apologies that could remove years of complicated emotions. But for the first time in a long time, the sisters were speaking honestly instead of pretending everything was fine. Meanwhile, Alexander Hayes continued watching the Caldwell situation carefully. The independent review had reached its final stage. The results confirmed that several decisions inside Caldwell Development required correction, and certain individuals had failed to follow proper procedures. Jason Miller's involvement had also become clear. He had provided misleading information about Emily while attempting to create the appearance that he was the more responsible parent. Alexander read the final report in silence. Thomas stood nearby, waiting for instructions. "What will you do?" Thomas asked. Alexander closed the folder. "The same thing I would do if Emily was not involved." Thomas nodded. He had worked with Alexander for years and knew that answer mattered. The billionaire CEO everyone saw in business magazines was not interested in winning personal battles. He was interested in creating fair outcomes. That evening, Alexander visited Eleanor Hayes at her home. His mother sat by the window with a cup of tea, listening as he told her about Emily and Noah. Eleanor smiled knowingly. "She reminds me of someone." Alexander smiled. "You." His mother shook her head gently. "No. She reminds me of who I hope people would become." Later that night, Emily found another message from Alexander. It was not a business update. It was not an offer of help. It was simply a question. "How was your day?" Emily stared at the screen for a moment. It was such a normal question, yet it felt different coming from him. Because he was not asking what problem needed solving. He was asking about her. Emily typed back with a small smile. "Better than yesterday." A few seconds later, his reply appeared. "That is a good start." And for the first time in years, Emily believed tomorrow could be better than today. 3 months after the wedding that changed everything, Emily Carter stood in the doorway of a small community center holding Noah's hand while sunlight poured through the tall windows. It was not a luxury hotel. There were no crystal chandeliers, no expensive decorations, and no guests measuring the value of a person by the clothes they wore. There were only children laughing, parents talking, and a feeling of warmth that money could never purchase. Noah had been invited to participate in a local art program supported by the Hayes Foundation. Emily had been nervous when she first accepted the opportunity. She worried people would assume she received special treatment because of Alexander. But when she arrived, she discovered something important. Alexander had not created a shortcut for her. He had created a door and trusted her to walk through it herself. Emily was now working toward a certification in accounting, something she had once abandoned when life demanded that she choose between her dreams and survival. She had chosen her son without hesitation. Now, with new opportunities in front of her, she was finally choosing herself too. Across the room, Noah proudly showed his newest drawing to Alexander. The billionaire CEO sat on a small chair designed for children, listening with complete attention as Noah explained every detail. "This is our house," Noah said, pointing at the picture. "And this is Mom. This is me. And this is you." Alexander looked at the drawing carefully. "I have a place in the picture?" Noah nodded. "Of course. You came when we needed you." Emily watched from a distance, feeling a quiet emotion she could not easily describe. Alexander had changed many things in her life, but the most important thing was not the opportunities or the support. It was the way he reminded her that she deserved kindness without having to prove she was worthy of it. Later that afternoon, they walked through the park near the community center. The autumn air was cool, and fallen leaves covered the path beneath their feet. Noah ran a few steps ahead, chasing leaves as they moved in the wind. Emily and Alexander walked together in comfortable silence. "You know," Emily said, "when I first met you, I thought you were someone from a completely different world." Alexander smiled. "I was." She looked at him. "And now?" He looked toward Noah before answering. "Now I think people spend too much time deciding who belongs in their world and who does not." Emily smiled softly. "That sounds like something your mother would say." "She would probably say it better." They both laughed. It was a simple moment, but it carried something neither of them had expected. Not a grand promise. Not a perfect ending. Just two people who had learned that connection often begins when someone chooses to see another person clearly. A few weeks later, Emily attended a small ceremony where she received her accounting certification. Lauren sat in the front row, cheering louder than anyone. Noah held a handmade sign that read, "Congratulations, Mom." Alexander stood quietly near the back, giving her the space to enjoy her achievement without making it about him. When Emily found him afterward, she smiled. "You came." Alexander looked surprised. "You thought I would not?" She laughed softly. "I thought maybe your schedule was too important." Alexander shook his head. "Some things matter more than schedules." Emily looked around at the people who had supported her, then back at the man who had answered her call on the hardest night she could remember. She finally understood something. Alexander had never entered her life to save her. He had entered her life to remind her that she was already strong. He simply stood beside her while she discovered it herself. Years later, when people asked Emily how everything changed, she never talked about wealth or powerful names. She talked about a moment when she finally admitted she needed help. She talked about a man who arrived without judgment. And she always ended with the same truth. Sometimes the person who changes your life is not the one who gives you everything. Sometimes it is the person who helps you remember everything you already had inside you.